right? So
Mm,
it kept me from home. So I would go to church all the time, and not for like I said, not for God, not to find solace in the love of God, but just to find a respite from the foolishness that was going on at home. And
mm.
when that didn't work as much because it became an issue when I got home, because then it was always you weren't in church. You can't tell me you were in church. So it became a whole different thing.
You are now tuned in.
You are now tuned in to Let's Talk About Healing on Hindsight Media Radio 103.5 FM. Now, here's your host, Yvonne Pierre.
Hello and welcome to Let's Talk About Healing, where I have conversations with guests about various topics on healing the mind, body, and the spirit. Today, we will be talking about healing from trauma with my guest, Inez Reiley, a minister, life coach, and author. Welcome, Inez.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you having me.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation with you. One of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation with you is because I know your story and it is very powerful. So I wanted our listeners to benefit from not just hearing your story, but how you overcame and how you got to the place of healing from the trauma. So if you could tell us a little bit about the trauma that you faced growing up.
Well, the trauma that I faced, I tend to feel like it isn't as uncommon as I thought it was when I was growing up, right? The trauma of abandonment, the trauma of rejection, the trauma of abuse, um, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and learning to come to terms with that. Some of it, I think, even caused some PTSD in that it was so prevalent and started so early that my story, and rather my life, kind of got twisted around from the trajectory that it could have gone in, if that makes sense.
Mm, yeah.
Because so much happened. You know, not many people can say that they have a memory from being 2 or 3 years old, or of a man walking into their room. Can have a memory of sitting outside waiting for my drug addicted mother to come and pick me up from a babysitter, and then she never shows up. Those kind
Mm,
of stories. And so it sounds unique, but just to me, because I know that on some level, there are many of us who have gone through similar things. They may not have been from the same people, but in some sort of area in their lives.
yeah. And I resonate with what you're saying as far as you said that, you didn't realize until you got a little older that how common it was. And now the same was for me. For those that are tuning in that's not familiar with my story is I'm a childhood sexual abuse survivor.
Hmm.
And I've had dealt with, even though our stories are a little different, I still went through the abandonment
Hmm.
because my father was murdered when I was little. I think my mom said I was like one and a half. So that abandonment issue, on top of the trauma of being sexually abused by a babysitter
Hmm.
most of my childhood, and that I was the only one going through that as a kid because people around me, if they were, I wasn't aware of it.
Right.
But so I thought, yeah, that I was on this path all by myself. So it caused a lot of issues,
Right.
internal and some issues that affected how I moved,
Hmm.
as a teenager and as a preteen. So what type of influence did the trauma that you had have on you?
Well, just like you said, as you maneuver through your preteen years and your teen years, and that kind of trauma, those kinds of issues cause you to be silent with your words of trying to explain, or try to tell somebody what was actually going on. So it shows up in other ways, right? So you start to
Mhm.
become rebellious because I'm not going to let anybody else do it. They're doing it at home, but I'm going to get in the street. Nobody else is going to do that to me, right? So you get a
Yeah.
little, we get a little um, overprotective of ourselves. We get a little defensive, or sometimes a lot defensive, right? So I find myself, which is interesting, in that my first place of refuge as a new teen, 13, 14 years old, I went to church, right? And I spent a
Mhm.
lot of time in church, but it wasn't seeking God, it was seeking refuge from home, right? So
Mm.
it kept me from home. So I would go to church all the time, and not for, like I said, not for God, not to find solace in the love of God, but just to find a respite from the foolishness that was going on at home. And
Mm.
when that didn't work as much, because it became an issue when I got home, because then it was always, you weren't in church, you can't tell me you were in church. So it became a whole different thing. So then I
Yeah.
ended up going, and I was hanging out I found some friends, a group of friends that was totally opposite of what my family was like. And I went out there and I said, okay, I don't give a, you know, this, that, and the other
Yeah.
thing. And I'm just going to go out there and just wild out, as the kids would say now, in terms of just being 15, 16 years old, going to nightclubs and hanging out in the parks in the city of New York, and going here and going there, and just walking the streets and being loud. And I had started getting high, and I had all of this stuff,
Yeah.
trying to escape. And that's what it was. I was trying to escape. I wasn't going to get so high, because I was constantly reminded that my mother was a drug addict, right? So the family that I ended up staying with, because she never came back to get me, or at least that was my thought back then. And so then
Yeah.
and so that family didn't love me. They just tolerated me. Or at least that's how I felt, right?
You're right.
And so
Right.
we go along, and so I started to just carry on. And I then, because I got all of this courage, or this false courage, in the street, I was able to take it back home. Well, you're not going to touch me, or you're not going to do this to me, and then I started being rebellious in the home. And
Right.
so yeah, that was the earlier parts in it. But as time goes on, right, when we get to be in our late teens and our early 20s, and we go to college, and we do all of this stuff, um something simmered me down, right? It was like, okay, this takes too much effort. It's taking too much effort to carry this much anger. It's taking too much effort to carry this much shame. It's taking too much effort to carry this much guilt. And I needed something else. And that's when I went back to church. But this time I was seeking something else, and not just a refuge from home.
How old were you at that time?
By then I was 19 or 20 years old. It was
Mm.
before it was before I turned 21, because you know back in my day, 18 was the year. you know it wasn't 21 like it is now. So 18 was the year of, like, oh, I'm grown now, right?
Yeah.
I can make some decisions. I had left home by then, not initially of my own accord, but the final move was a decision that I was allowed to make. And um and I had to settle down. I had gotten myself into so many things by then, that I,
Mm.
I was tired,
Yeah.
right? I was tired.
And I can relate to that. The and I'm not gonna go too much into my story, but I do want to touch on that the influence, the abuse and stuff had on me was I started drinking and stuff at a very young
Mm,
age. At the age of 12, I was sexually active
mhm,
and drinking and partying and doing all kind of stuff in middle school. And that led to the rebellion and just angry and not understanding, you know, why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling because I'm a child trying to process all these things that happened to me and not understanding why it happened and all those things. So, but I want to ask, you said you started at you started before 21. You started going to church for a different reason than what you initially was going for,
Hmm.
which was to escape in the
Right.
beginning. So once you start, when did was that the turning point, or what things started to turn you um or change you? Uh when did the shift happen?
Right. Well, I have come to know that there are several shifts that we go through that's going to get us back on track, depending on how
Mhm.
far away we have gone off track. And that was my first uh, fork in the road. I'm going to put it that way because it had to be several. I had to get back to where he originally wanted, where I believe God originally wanted me to be. And
Yeah.
so I had to take several steps. And so that was the first step. And the first step was understanding that I was, they have this old saying, and I hope this is okay to say it. They had this old saying back in
Mm.
the day that you're headed to hell with gasoline drawers on. And
Yes,
so,
I've heard that.
and so I kind of felt like that's where I was headed because it was so much stuff that I was getting into. Just like you said, being promiscuous because I'm not going to continue to be the person that you're going to take advantage of. If you're going to do it, I'm going to say, go ahead and do it. Right.
Right.
And so that's how it was. And it didn't matter if it was a male or a female. I'm
Mhm.
going to say yes because I want it to be my choice. And you're not going to,
Yeah.
you're not going to take it away from me. And so
Mm.
that's, that's where I got again, the smoking. I wasn't necessarily drinking as much because I had seen alcoholism in the family that I was raised in, and it wasn't pretty,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I wasn't trying to do that. But I had started to smoke weed or, take a little pill here or do something like that. But again, I kept saying I'm not going to be my mother, right? And
Mm.
so there, but for the grace of God goes I. And that was the thing that stopped me short of because I could have, right? Easily I could
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
And so the turning point for me was I'm not trying to go to hell. And that was my first step into heading toward back into the church. And it took
Mm.
several more turns before I could hear what I know is the voice of God say, why did you come to me?
Mm.
And if it wasn't because you knew that I loved you, then you came for the wrong reason.
Wow. So, with everything that happened up until that point,
Hmm.
and I'm sure, you haven't went into detail about
Right.
everything that happened. Um, but with everything that happened up until that point, what made you continue to trust God?
I continue I continued on a trust road to God, right? Because
Mm.
when we, when we're growing, we're products of our environment, right? So when we grow up in an environment where we can't trust anyone,
Yeah.
right? We can't trust
Yeah.
anyone. I couldn't even trust the woman who gave birth to me. I
Yeah.
couldn't trust the family who said we'll keep you. I didn't feel safe. I didn't, so trust was difficult for me,
Yeah.
but I had to do something, right? When you come to the end of yourself, when they have this thing when you're sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I know 19 is kind of young to do it, but I had done so much and been so many places by then that I didn't want to do it anymore. And so I knew couldn't even trust myself for a minute, right? So I said,
Yeah.
I gotta do something. And my self-esteem was so low. My self-worth was so low. I didn't think I had anything to offer because I felt like the world had taken everything from me.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, that began my trust road with the Lord, but that didn't come for a while after that. right? Like I said,
Mm,
my initial thing was I don't want to go to hell. So I kept myself in church to keep myself from going back to what I was doing, right?
yeah,
And then I was married with children before I realized that I didn't really trust God the way that He wanted
yeah,
me to.
yeah. It's a
It
process.
is a process. And
It's
I think that some people who um, make the decision to say that they want to choose Christ thinks that it's going to be an instantaneous thing. You know, they think that, they have this whole thing, my hands look new, my feet look new, and all this other kind of stuff, and everything is just going to be great after this. And
right.
it's not, right?
Yeah.
Because there's so much stuff that we have to put off. There's so much stuff that we have to open up about with ourselves. There's so much stuff that we have to admit about ourselves. There's so many things that we have to say. I can't blame everybody because I made a bunch of those choices on my own. And
Mm,
so um, that became a thing that that I had to really get in with God about, and saying, I need to know when He said to me, if you don't think I love you. And my response was, I don't even know what that is. Now, mind
yeah.
you, I'm married and I've got
Right.
kids, right? And so
Yeah.
it becomes a whole different situation, and stuff starts to I know this may not be a word, but unlayer, right? We're taking the
Hmm.
layers off, but it's a
Yeah.
slow process, and we
Yeah.
have to commit to it.
Yeah. And you have to learn how to love.
Yes,
You have to, because you've been betrayed so much and you've been through, had so many wounds, it becomes a protection over your heart. So it's not easy to be so loving. Wasn't something a first language. So it's something that we have to, those of us that have been through trauma, which I think everybody has been through some form of trauma
right.
at some point in their life, maybe not childhood, but trauma comes in many different forms.
Hmm.
But it does affect your trust with not just God, but trust with
With
yourself and
yourself.
trust with people. And part of trust is love, but that's
It's
even with trust, I had to learn how to um not just trust God and trust myself, but trust the process, and trust the journey,
right.
and not be so guarded. Is We become very protective. And I want to touch on something that you mentioned
Hmm.
earlier about allowing things to happen when you were younger,
Hmm.
when you were being abused, and even after the abuse, getting to the place of just allowing things to happen. And I wanted to touch on that because it it when we go through something that traumatic, part of the protection, everybody deals with it differently, but part of the protection is, you know, learning to surrender to things for protection, or to, and it trickles not just in relationships, but it trickles in other places in your life. And that was something I had to learn as an adult too, is that because I was, sometimes we're extra hard on ourselves, and I realized that I go with the flow too much on certain things. Even when I disagree,
Right.
I try to keep the peace. And I realized that stemmed from being that little girl that was constantly trying to protect myself from harm, and the abuse and the rapes and all that stuff. So you learn in order to survive this, part of the survival is to surrender to it.
Right.
And and that part also deals with it affects your trust
Right.
with yourself people with God.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad that you talked about the process of, the continuing to learn to trust God, because a lot of people think part of the process, when they see someone like you that's into ministry, they just think, oh, she went from this trauma to immediately believing and trusting in
Oh,
God. But I'm glad that you touched on that this was a process.
yes, yes.
So what inspired you to get into ministry?
Well, I honestly believe I was called to it, and
Mhm,
and
mm,
and called to it because of, right? And I think
yeah,
that uh, we take our trauma and we take our situations and think that they are of no value, right?
mm,
And because we
mhm,
think that our situations and circumstances are of no value, then we start to think that about ourselves, right? And one of the
yeah,
things that God has shared with me was that I'm not a product. I'm not that, right? I am more than the sum of the things that I have done or that have been done to me. And
yes,
so, when he said, you have something to share. And my first thing was, what? Right?
mm,
What? I didn't even want to have children for a while because I didn't think I had enough to give to them. I didn't think that I had what I thought that they would need to survive in the world that we were in, right? Because
yeah,
there's so much hurt and there's so much just ridiculous in the people. This is how I was thinking, that the people are just so bad. And me alone, myself alone, was not going to be enough for them.
yeah,
And I heard him say, I will create a legacy for you.
mm,
And the legacy comes out of what I have been through, right? Because you're still
yeah,
here. You
yeah,
know people that you went to school with, and this is what I'm hearing, you went to school with that didn't make it, right?
right,
They're not still standing for whatever the reason is. And
right,
so my yes to God was, if you think so, right?
yeah,
If you think
yeah,
so, after I came up with all these other excuses, I'm too young, I'm too shy, because of course I felt like my voice didn't matter because it didn't matter when I was growing up.
right,
Who's going to listen to me? Who cares what I have been through? And I'm nothing special, right? We start talking down, you know, about ourselves. And he said, no, but I'm going to get you from here to there.
mm,
And that in the meantime portion of life, the in process portion of life, coming from rags to riches, so to speak, and not as far as money is concerned, but as far as value of my in myself is concerned. And
yes,
so that's when I said yes, because he said, I've got you're gonna you're gonna give them, for you're gonna give them some peace, because I'm gonna show you what peace looks like.
mm,
And so then it became, I'm going to use what you have been through to help somebody else make it through. And
yeah,
so that's is still my driving force. It is still my calling, uh, to be that servant, right, to those people, whoever it God puts in my path. It doesn't even matter who it is. If I
yeah,
see, if I see or I sense, I'm going to ask the question, how are you? And I'm going to stand there and wait for a response, which a lot of people don't do. And
mm-mm,
so then when a person sits there and said, and you can honestly say, I know what you're talking about, right? That empathy, I see it, I get it, I see you, I've
yeah,
been there,
yeah,
right? Those kinds of testimonies, those kinds of, I can stand with you in the trenches because I know what feeling like trash is. And I know
yeah,
what coming up out of that trash heap looks like and what it feels like,
yeah.
right? So,
And that's why he needs to use someone like you, because because you are able to relate and you're able to, you know, be non-judgmental
Right.
when talking, with someone who is dealing with something, even if it's something, different than what you dealt with, but knowing the process that you had to go through, and the internal battles and all that comes along with it, being able to makes it easier, not just for you but for the other person to be able to open up and have a conversation and relate. And I know for me, when I was younger, um it was easier for me to open up to those who I felt understood
Hmm.
and that weren't judgmental, even though I'm pretty much an open book anyway. But but it was easier for me to, as far as like someone trying to counsel me, because I stayed in trouble all the time in high school, well, in school period. And it was easier for me to have a conversation with an adult that said, "Look, I've been through this." And I was all ears, but if they couldn't relate, it was hard for me to open up. I mean, I'm different now as an
Right.
adult, um, because I don't judge the messenger. But, as a kid, it was really hard for me to open up if you couldn't relate to what I was going
Right.
through. And I think that, that God needed someone like you, um, in order to move the way he needs you to move. And even in the Bible, most of the people that he used were people that, you wouldn't think he would have used.
Hmm.
So and I wanted to touch on too how, as far as our value and our worth, that's part of the journey or part of the process for those who have been abused. We're often battle with our self-worth,
Absolutely.
and we battle with, um, uh, how feeling like we're enough, um, whether it's through our craft, as writers, whether it's, the stories that we're telling in our books or projects, and also, just us as individuals feeling like we're enough. So, and that's part of what kept us silent too, was not feeling like we was worthy to speak up
Right.
or worthy to, um, you know, tell on the person. And also, when it happens, like for me, I was too young to understand what was happening.
Right.
So, because a lot of people question, well, why didn't you say anything? Well, I didn't know what was happening
Mm.
until after it was over,
Right.
um, years later.
Right.
So, so yeah, I just wanted to touch on that. But also, so what did your healing journey look like, or what does it look like?
Right. Because right, it's still happening. Because when you live your life, like you said, taking the layers off requires time, and especially if the wounds are deep, right? And so when you're
Yeah,
talking about something that happened from such a young age, right? I have from such a young age, and trying not to go, I'm not trying to be too deep, but even as far as if you're talking about a mother who was addicted to drugs, what kind of
yeah.
situation was I ruminating in the womb, right? What
Mhm.
kinds of things was I even born into just because of somebody else's actions, right?
Right.
And so then that was something that I had no control over. So we have to go back and say it's not even that. And so the process takes time. It takes time sitting in, your situations. Because just like we were saying, even in process, I was called to the ministry and still ended up in an abusive relationship, right? So called to the ministry and I still lost the custody of my children, right? Called to the
Mhm.
ministry and still dealing with people who were betraying me, and turning their backs on me and being abandoned by people because of their belief in a person who was truly unbelievable.
Mm.
And so then that just added more stuff, right? That was just like, okay, now dang, I thought I had established a little bit of something. I thought I had some grace that had been given to me because of what was actually going down. And then to find myself right back in the situation of being abandoned, of being rejected, right? Of being not chosen, of not having even enough worth to say that someone can say you can't have your children for no reason, right? I wasn't on
Yeah.
drugs. I hadn't abandoned
Yeah.
them. I hadn't left them anywhere. I wasn't
Right.
mistreating them, right? And
Mhm.
then so then it became a whole that was piled on top of it, and that became so much bigger because of what I had gone through, you know, and it was horrible, right? It was horrible. and
Yeah.
and and then I had a spell of saying that I'm not going to forgive because there was no reason for this. This is what I'm thinking now. There's
Yeah.
no reason for this now. I didn't cause this on my own. And so then other things started to go on. And then God said to me, He said, I need to take you back to that moment where you said you wasn't going to forgive. And I need you to see what unforgiveness did to you, right? Because it's not about the other people. And we hear that all the time. But
Yeah.
unforgiveness makes bitterness creep in. Unforgiveness we walk around with resentment. We walk around with anger. We walk around with all of this stuff looking at people. Somebody's got to validate me, right? Unforgiveness does a job and a number on us. And we and so then God said, I need for you to get that off of you. And so you're going to have to forgive him. Not because he can do anything to make it right, because he can't make it right. And I think that that's when I came to the realization that I had to come to terms that my past is my past and it can't be changed, right? Then
Yeah.
I said, then it was like, okay, now my journey began. But again, we're talking about something that just happened as recently as just 25 years ago, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And so now, and it took a really long time for me to find my worth in something other than being a wife, something other than being a mother, something other than being an elder in a church because I had to leave that church I was in. It was it was just so much. And so my journey from there had to be able to find my worth in what I felt that God was saying that I was worthy of. And again, it turned back to his love because his love was unconditional. He knew what kind of crap I had been in. He knows the stuff that I'm thinking about. And this is the belief that I have, right? And we'll say it's a higher power because it doesn't matter. Anything bigger than ourselves, right? That's going to understand a thing about us. That's going to help,
Mhm.
rather help us understand a thing about us.
Yeah.
And so then the process began. Okay, first, you got to learn how to forgive yourself because you thought that you put yourself in this situation because of all
Yeah.
of the stuff that was going on in your life. And so you're,
Yeah.
finding these little niches to put yourself into to identify yourself as, other than finding out who you really were. And so
Yeah.
the path was a path of self-awareness, right? It was a path of finding my worth in myself and understanding that God loved Inez, period. He didn't love
Yeah.
Inez the mother. He didn't love Inez the wife. He didn't love Inez the daughter. He didn't love Inez the stepdaughter or the goddaughter or the right. He loved me.
Yeah.
And so I had to begin to love myself, but I had to first get to know myself. And that's part of the
Mm.
process, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there are so many different layers
Mm-hmm.
to to healing and forgiveness. Forgiving others is important. It's an important key to get your power back, but also forgiving yourself, as you mentioned,
Mhm.
is powerful because a lot of the guilt and a lot of the regret and questioning what you could have did differently and all that weighs heavy,
Mhm.
and it affects how and I always say move.
Mhm.
But it affects, your decisions, and it affects, everything that you do. Every single thing that you do. It affects every relationship. It affects your approach to relationships. And, sadly, it affects the approach of how you love yourself.
Right.
And, there's many times I stood in the mirror. I couldn't stand in the mirror because I had struggled with accepting and loving myself
Mhm.
because of all my flaws.
Mhm.
You know, during my journey too, I had to do the same thing, deal with forgiveness, forgiving of others and all that. And I had to forgive God.
Right.
Um, and find peace with everything that happened and understanding that it happened for a reason. And some stuff accepting that I just won't understand.
Right.
There's just certain parts of it that I just won't understand, but I choose to look at the silver lining.
Right.
I choose to look at, okay, how can I empower, how can I uplift other people from what I've been through?
Mhm.
And and how can I heal from this? Because which is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this show, because I feel like we're always on a path of healing,
Mhm.
always from childhood to adulthood, loss of family members, healing from something, whether it's health issues or
Right.
you know different trauma or betrayal or whatever it is, we're constantly healing.
Right.
And, you know, it's important for where we're going in life that we do be intentional about our healing.
Right.
So I want to ask, what's the greatest lesson you learned during your healing process?
The greatest lesson I believe that I learned was to give myself grace and to be
Mm,
patient with myself. Don't put a timetable on it because in reality, we don't know what kind of damage that had been done at our cellular levels, right?
mm,
Because it goes
yeah,
it goes that deep. And so if I look at something, right? Because if we break a bone, I'll take my own, I'll give you an example. I had been
mhm,
walking around with a broken ankle and
yeah.
didn't even know it.
Oh,
I had
wow.
experienced some pain, right? But because I had been living with pain already,
Mm,
I didn't pay close enough attention to it. My foot was swelling up, and I was like, man, I just got to go home and put my foot up. I got to put some ice on it. And then I finally said, okay, it's just swollen all around. Let me just go get this checked out, right?
yeah,
And so the healing is that way. We find ways to say that we try to do it ourselves. Oh, I can take care of this. I can go and I can meditate over here. I can go and get quiet over here. I can go and do this or do that before we actually go talk to someone. Sometimes it takes that, right? Before we
yeah,
actually
yeah.
see just what damage had been done. I went to the
Mm,
doctor thinking that they were going to sit there and say, "Oh, your Achilles tendon is messed up a little bit because I had had surgery on it before." And she took an X-ray and said, "Oh, wow, when did this happen?" And I was like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And she was like, "When did your ankle was broken?"
wow.
And I said,
Wow.
"What? What?" Right? And so now there's a whole nother thing. You get to go in the boot for all this time. You get to do all this other kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
this is what healing from trauma is, right? We know what we did, but we oh, I tweaked myself this way, or oh, I was in a bad relationship over here, or oh, I got a divorce over there. But everybody gets divorced, everybody twists their ankle. Oh, I did this by the time we're grown, right? Oh, this is just that. I got to be stronger than that. I got kids, I got this, I got to keep going. And
Yeah.
we don't realize just how much damage we're doing to ourselves. And so then we had to get an MRI of the ankle and come to find out a tore ligament. Why? Because I had been walking, now the ligament's getting all unstable because the bone is broke. And so all of this
Mhm.
other damage is happening
Yeah.
from something that I didn't even realize had taken place. And this is what healing is. It's a matter of let's move on. Let's see what we can do. But after a while, we realize that it's still hurting. There's still something going on. There's still, I don't know exactly what it is. I can't necessarily put my finger on it, but it's still something there. Maybe I need to go get it checked out. Right. So be patient. It was weeks, right? I had walked on this foot for weeks, and it was weeks after, and I'm still going through something, right? And so
Yeah.
be gracious with myself, be patient with the process. Even after they had done a procedure, he said it could be up and down from here. You can have some swelling and some pain, and then some days you don't. And this, see, that's what we understand how our lives are. And so,
Yeah.
just because I feel good today doesn't mean that I'm healed from yesterday.
Mm.
And so, be patient. And that's one of the biggest things that I have learned. And I don't allow anybody to tell me you ain't done with that yet. You still in that boot? You right? You still,
Yeah.
golly, when are you ever? But you don't get to make that determination because you don't know what's actually going on. So I'm not going to allow you or myself to rush a process just to end right back up here again later.
Yeah. But you this that was a powerful analogy because a lot of times um we're walking around, we feel the pain, but we don't take the time to see what the pain is stemming
Right,
from. And we
right,
self-medicate and we, like you were saying, you put your foot up or you just, go home and do something for the swelling, but you didn't look at the root
right,
cause or get to the root cause. And when you finally did, other things had were damaged because you ignored
right,
the first sign of that something was
right,
wrong. That's a very, and we do that a lot. We self-medicate or we go, "Well, let me just lay down," or
right,
"Let me just, do this about it," or just, and a lot of time and I think prayer is powerful. However, prayer, faith without action is dead. So you can't just pray that your ankle heal. You have to
right,
you have to actually do the work
right,
and you have to go to therapy and you have to do different things to help the healing
right,
process and to help God, you know, with that. It's like a lot of times people say, "Oh, Imma just pray for a job." No, you have to apply.
right, right,
You have to sign the application
right,
if they still do that.
right,
Um, but yeah, you have to go through the process of healing, like you said, wearing the boot and all that, and knowing that this is gonna be a up and down
right,
process, but knowing that you in order to get to the other side, you have to go through this. You have to and therapy is painful.
yes,
Um, therapy is painful, but in order the lesson I learned from even therapy, physical therapy,
mm-hmm,
was that in order to heal, I have to endure the pain. I have to face the pain in order to heal from this.
right,
And that was an aha moment for
mm-hmm,
me because I was laying there because I had frozen shoulders and it was
ooh, I
excruciating
had that,
pain,
mm-hmm,
um, for them, but in order for them to loosen the muscles and to help me increase my range of motion, it was 2 years
mm-hmm,
of therapy and working and, trying to, um, be able to use my arms. But because I knew what the process was, and because I knew, okay, this is going to take time, this is going to be painful, I may need to take a pain pill before I go.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
but but knowing what you're facing and enduring, um you have to, in order to heal. um but in the opposite, to not do it would have been, I would have been in pain longer,
Right.
and I would have never, I don't know when I would have ever been able to use my arms again, you know.
Or if
So
ever.
it's, if ever. And it's important to, just like if you would have ignored your ankle,
Right.
if you would have ignored the pain and just kept patching on it and kept trying to, soak it in Epsom salt, or,
Mm-hmm.
stay off of it was still broken.
Right.
And I just really appreciate you using that analogy, to point out being patient with the process of healing.
Right. And if I could say
Um,
real quick, if I could say real quick,
mhm,
is the thing
mhm.
that one of the things that you said that was so valuable that sometimes continue. You have to finish, right?
Yeah,
If you have to finish, it's not enough to say, oh, it's been feeling good for a few days. So then you stop, right? And then what you do
yeah,
is you end up re-injuring it, right? Or hurting yourself more because
yeah,
you're not as stable as you think. That's why I always
yeah.
say when you take antibiotics, take the whole thing, even though you're not feeling right. Take all of the
Right,
antibiotics until you're done. And it's the same way with healing from trauma. You got to follow through. You got to get from A to B to C. You have to take those steps, and you have to some step you may have to go back. Let me rethink this one again. Let me go back over this because I'm really not ready to move on to step C because it was something that I left undone. It was
yeah,
something that I left buried. And when we want true healing, we got to keep asking the why. We have to keep asking the whys. And,
yeah,
that's imperative. Why I feel bad? Why? What exactly feels bad? Well, the
yeah,
doctor asked those questions. Well, what were you doing? Did you do this? And I had to really, really think back. What could I have done? Right?
yeah,
What could I have done? Where was ground zero? Right? What was the thing that started this whole spiral effect? And so we have to really answer those hard questions, go back and think, and don't sit there and say, it doesn't matter when it happened, it's already done. No, we need to find out where it started so we can see how long it's been going
right.
on, right?
And get to the root
And get to
cause.
the root.
Yeah,
Yeah, so,
yeah. So you can fix everything
right,
else. Is because that affected how you walked,
absolutely.
and it wouldn't have, you would have had a permanent limp
Mm-hmm.
if you wouldn't have tried to, you know,
Right.
get it fixed. It would have been worse.
Yeah.
So there are people, I'm sure, that haven't started the healing process, for whatever trauma that they have endured or are enduring. Um, Speak to them. What advice would you give someone who is feeling bound by their trauma?
Well, the first thing is we always hear this is that acknowledging that you need the help, right? That's always the
Mm,
first step. I we say, I don't know what to do. That's acknowledgement, right? And so when we can get there, saying I don't know breaks down a wall of not wanting to know. And so it broadens our perspective. We're no longer stuck in the box of I don't want to know, right? And then our
yeah,
view gets a little bigger in saying, well, I want to know, but I don't know what I want to know. And so as we go on, we don't we fear is one of the biggest things that holds us back.
mm-hmm,
And what we want to do, and I want to talk to that one who's afraid of getting to a place that they think that they can't come back from, right?
Mm.
There was another crossroad that I had gotten myself to, and I said, if I let myself go there, I'm going to be a blubbering mess in the corner somewhere. And how
Mm.
can I do that with these small children, a house to run, a husband to be a wife to? How can I do that? And the answer was, you owe it to them,
Yeah.
right? You owe it to yourself to be the best version of what you say you want to be. And so if you don't find out what that thing is, you're going to perpetuate it in your household, in your environment. You're going to perpetuate it because you don't have, yet that's all you're going to act out of. That is your perception of everything is coming from that one place. And so don't be afraid to ask the hard questions or to answer the hard questions that are being asked of you. And so today we want to ask you, what's your reason for not taking that first step? And the first step would be, there is something the matter, and I want to know what that is, right? Because it's not the trauma that is the thing at this point, right? It's all of the decisions that we've made in the process after the trauma happened to us. It's the things we started to believe about ourselves that we have to address. The trauma happened, but what did we do with it? How much did we gather trying to cover ourselves up? How much stuff did we hide under so that someone wouldn't see that I was a product of incest? Or how are we not going to see that I was not, that my child came because I was raped? How is it that we can't see that I go home at night and I drink myself to sleep, or I use drugs so that I can get some sleep so I can function the next day? How
Mm.
do I take the mask off and let people see the wounds of me and still think that I have something to offer? Don't be afraid. It's going to be better than you think. You just have to get through some really challenging times. But those times are going to come in increments. It's not all going to be healing, doesn't all. Sometimes it does, right? Sometimes it's just a matter of take this pill and it's going to heal. It's going to take some time, but all you got to do is take this one thing and you're going to be straight. But sometimes it's going to be come back and look at it again. Come back, let's follow up. Come back, let's do this over. Come back. Like you said, 2 years, right? My
Yeah.
whole process started when I was 19. And I'm telling you, I think I was in my 40s before I found some solid ground to stand on for a
Yeah.
long period of time. But
Yeah.
I had some good times, but I had just as many bad
Yeah. And I want to add to that.
times.
I would say that was good. I would say for me, the process took longer because I was resistant.
Yes.
Um, and I was, you know, afraid of what it looked like to
Hmm.
be free from, the trauma. I was afraid of looking at myself, having to deal with the things that is like we mentioned earlier. It's one thing to forgive others, but to forgive yourself, for allowing for me, for allowing the sexual abuse to happen,
Hmm.
um, or allowing the feeling like I allowed the rapes to
Right.
happen. um but the process took longer because I was afraid to look in the mirror, and I was doing, hopping around, you know,
Right.
with this wound, without taking care of it. And slowly dealing with the symptoms
Mm-hmm.
that were coming from it. Like, I have self-esteem issues. Let me
Mm-hmm.
deal with it. Or I'm going through this. Let me deal with that. Instead of really, really, really getting to the root of what is causing these symptoms, and understanding it. And also, I would offer for them to, if they to get some help.
Right.
To It's okay to go to therapy,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's okay to speak to, and it's just like a relationship, finding someone who you can really have a conversation with, or that you feel like you really walking away with something from them. Is finding the right person for you. For me, my therapists have been people that I've never met, a bulk of my therapy.
Right.
And that's I'm constantly reading books. I'm constantly watching tutorials. If I'm struggling with self-esteem, I'm going to read about it. How do
Mm-hmm.
I overcome it? How do I deal with this? How do I, so I'm always, trying to, and I have seen therapists,
Right.
um, over the years. I'll go to, one here or one there. Um, but, you know, but it's an ongoing process. Whether you, even if you go into therapy, you still have to do the work. You
Absolutely.
have,
Absolutely.
you have put in the work, and it's being intentional and doing what you need to do to grow and heal from whatever it is, and not just assume this is just part of my journey.
Right.
It is part of your
Right.
journey, but it's also a part of your journey to heal.
To heal. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Because if we don't, right, if we don't, then we just keep on in the same way that we have been. And this is where
Mhm.
I think we get that terminology, generational curses, because we don't want to let go and change
Yeah.
how we do things. So we teach the people that we are around to be the same way,
Mm.
right? And so
Yeah.
when we say that we want more, then, let that change begin with me because it
Yeah.
can, right? It can. We're
Yeah.
not talking about changing genetics, but generational curses is not about genetics. It's about the way we do a thing. This
Yeah.
is the way we carry out things. My family don't. The men don't go to the hospital, and our family this. That's what the right. My family,
Right.
we gonna go, and my father was in the street, so I'm gonna be in the street. I raised my son in the street, right? That's what the generational curse is,
Yeah. Yeah.
because
It's
that's just
mindset.
right. It's a mindset, and so we
Yeah.
have to want trauma breeds those mindsets. And
Mm.
if
Mhm.
we want to change the mindset, we have to address the trauma and the things that come along with it,
Yeah.
right? And so,
Yeah.
and following that through, it's not easy, but going through the trauma wasn't easy either. And we did it.
Yeah.
We're still standing,
Yeah.
right? And so,
Mm.
if we can live through it, we can live.
Yeah.
We can live to it, right? We
Mm.
can live to healing. We can go on and make
Yeah.
that process on to the other side of that too.
Yeah. And realizing that you're worth it.
Absolutely,
You you are worth it. Your children are worth it. Like you mentioned, healing is it affects everybody.
everybody.
Yeah. Whether you choose to heal or not, it's gonna affect
Right,
everybody
right.
in your life.
And yeah,
Yeah. This was awesome. This was amazing. And I'm sitting here like a sponge, because I'm always listening to see how I can grow, and how I can learn from other people's stories. And your story is very powerful, and not just because of what you've been through, but what your resilience and your passion and determination to grow from it,
mm,
and to not just grow from it, but to be a light for other people. That is commendable, and so I thank you for sharing your story. But before we go, I wanted to know, what current or upcoming projects do you have that you would like to share with us?
well, I am. in process of writing a couple of books, and um, hopefully those will come out this year. I'm also in process
Mm,
of starting a podcast called It's
mm,
Fellowship Time,
yeah,
just about, coming to the table and having discussions like even you and I are having right now, because
yeah,
people need sometimes to have a listening ear and a
yeah,
space to say what they need to say, however they need to say it. And so that's what It's
yeah.
Fellowship Time is.
I'm looking forward to that. Once you get that, please feel free to shoot me the link so I can check it out. I'm really, really looking for. I love podcasts. I really do. I'm a connoisseur of. I constantly listen to podcasts because I'm constantly wanting to learn and grow from other people stories. So where can they go to stay in touch with you, to keep up with your projects, to check out your podcast? Please share your link with us.
I have Linktree and
Mm,
YouTube, and that's just Inez Reiley on YouTube. I also have an author's page on uh, Amazon with the same name, Inez Reiley. That's Reilly. And the typical Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, starting
mm,
to get better on those things. And Inez Reilly and I Am's Property. And that's IAM as in Mary, S as in Sam, Property. And you can look me up on any of those platforms.
and I'm gonna give your link tree. All those links are on your link tree,
Yes,
which is linktr.ee/INEZREILLY.
yes.
Inez, thank you so much for your transparency, sharing your story with us and your journey of healing with us. This was awesome for me. I really enjoyed it, and I hope our listeners did too.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, I would love to hear from you in the comment section. Let us know. Let us know how you've been able to heal. Thank you so much for tuning in to Let's Talk About Healing. Be sure to follow, like, and share this with anyone you feel needs to hear it. Look, you owe it to yourself and to your purpose to grow and heal. Until next time, be blessed.
Thank you for tuning in to Let's Talk About Healing with Yvonne Pierre on Hindsight Media Radio 103.5 FM. We hope you enjoyed the show. Be sure to subscribe, like, and share.